Okay, hello, Ujjwal. We were waiting for you.
Sorry for the delay. Please carry on.
Okay, yeah, Ryan, please take the lead. And then Kanak, I hope you have started. Okay, done. Ryan, please, you can proceed.
Hello, good afternoon and good morning to everyone. Welcome to the webinar on Secure 6G, Australia-India Cooperation, which was organized by the Australian Risk Policy Institute, IIIT Bangalore, and CUTS. It's also supported by the University of Queensland and also the Australian Government Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. My name is Professor Ryan Cole, and I'm representing the University of Queensland's Cybersecurity Research Centre. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting on today. And in my case, here in Brisbane, we are acknowledging the Yagara and the Turrbal people. Today, we have a very good lineup of speakers, and I want to acknowledge the hard work put in by the teams from CUTS, ARPI, UQ, putting in the effort to actually bring this whole program together, and the support from many people around the countries that are involved in this. I would like to also give an introduction to UQ Cyber briefly before I hand over the time to Tony Church, who is the chair and the president of Australian Risk Policy Institute. UQ Cyber was actually formed in 2019, and it's a research institute that's actually comprising of more than 60 academics from 13 different schools around the University of Queensland. We take an interdisciplinary approach to the problem of cybersecurity, and we are constantly looking at how we can solve problems, not just in the next 5 to 10 years, but also how it applies into the everyday lives of Australian and international communities. UQ Cyber has been working on, even though it's been established in 2019, is actually building on the legacy of AusCERT, Australian Cyber Emergency Response Team, which was formed in 1992, and the second computer emergency response team in the world after the Carnegie Mellon's CERT. So this history and this heritage is something that we're proud of, and we hope that this experience and also the fact that we are able to come here today will be able to bring some value to you. So without further ado, I would like to hand over the time to Tony Church, President of the Australian Risk Policy Institute, to do a welcome speech. Tony, over to you.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you to the University of Queensland for hosting the webinar today. On behalf of the partners that you've mentioned, the Consumer Unity and Trust Society, CUTS International, the International Institute of Information Technology in Bangalore, and ARPI, the Australian Risk Policy Institute, a warm welcome to the webinar. The project to develop an ethical governance frame in 6G is a bilateral project between Australia and India, funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and conducted under the Australia-India Cyber and Critical Technology Partnership. Today, we'll hear some key points from the work to produce the frame, followed by a panel discussion and then the opportunity for questions and answers. But firstly, I'd like to talk about two policy considerations in relation to 6G. The first is context. 6G, of course, is part of a very complex IT environment, as is the world. In fact, that environment is now interconnected, interdependent, and interactive like never before. It is a metagrid. We are working within a metagrid. So 6G must be viewed as part of that, part of the whole environment. And of course, the direct relationship between 6G and artificial intelligence is one of the critical aspects We'll hear some more about artificial intelligence shortly. But while 6G will bring enormous opportunities and benefits to the world, it will also bring potential risks, known today as vulnerabilities or exposures, which must be addressed at an early point in time to avoid unintended consequences. Here is a point of difference between what has occurred in the past to what must occur going forward. Vulnerabilities and exposures, or potential risks, are critical to be developed for the IT industry. The world is strewn with cases which have not achieved that. So the ultimate approach then is to identify vulnerabilities and exposures through a completely different process of accessing in networks, product networks, people networks. When executives then are in a position to say, we have a list, we have awareness of the exposures and vulnerabilities, we can now make informed and preemptive decisions to protect against those vulnerabilities or exposures. That protection we've found globally works roughly on 80-20. 80% of the time, improvements, innovation, integration will follow, including increasing the resilience of the product or industry in question. The alternative approach, which if you think broadly, for example, from solar winds to more recent examples, the IT world has relied on risk management, waiting for risks to be identified or to come from left field or wicked problems to occur, and then try to manage them. Our intelligence from Silicon Valley says that a number of the leading organizations there have engaged expert risk managers to try to retrofit risk management into the areas that they missed. What we say is they were visible as exposures or vulnerabilities if the right approach had been taken. So the context for 6G is extremely important from a policy perspective. The second policy area, which I would like to outline today, refers to the pillars which were used to develop the 6G ethical governance frame. There are three: technical, consumer, and regulatory. So if I may, I'll have a brief look at those three areas just to open up the dialogue before we move into the outcomes of the frame and the panel discussion. On the technical matters, which comes to everyone's mind firstly, more detail will follow. But also right now on the drawing board, on the research table, are four of the most exciting technical issues in the last 12 months from our viewpoint in working through the project. They are the opportunity or potential for wireless networks, optical transmission, cross-frequency coupling, and the fourth, which might surprise everyone here, mixed mode intelligence. That is part of the science of intelligence augmentation, covering the areas that artificial intelligence at the moment cannot address and may never address, which are some of the issues that go to the Silicon Valley referral. I'll mention just two of those: sudden change and situational awareness. But that's a technical area. Moving forward, currently a research area, and ARPI has been involved in some of those aspects. The challenges today include, of course, cybersecurity, Ryan's area, then going into crime, cybercrime, quantum hacking. What impact would 6G have on quantum hacking? Identity theft, social media manipulation. This is an area of particular interest to ARPI. Military use, some of which is known, but mostly not known, unknown. And of course, fakery. Just yesterday in the media here, there was a court case where a judge picked up a fake reference, which was important to the proceedings. And on investigation, it was revealed it was a reference obtained through artificial intelligence and totally fake. A few months ago in America, a more serious court case involved an attorney presenting a series of precedents to persuade the judge on his matter. The judge wasn't convinced, and when the precedents were explored, they were all fake. And a more lightning issue, just recently, one of our members who's producing an historical film on Australia chose to introduce the voice of one of the leading environmentalists in the world, and through contacting various sources was quoted a price of $10,000, which he rejected. The agent then responded and said, well, I can give you a voice through artificial intelligence for a few dollars. So I just want to draw the attention of the breadth of the issues that we're looking at there on the technical side. Turning to the consumer world, enormous benefits await from 6G, particularly addressing access and equity issues. A very broad heading, but covers vulnerable communities, vulnerable people. India, of course, reportedly was the fastest country in the world to roll out 5G and reached a 95% coverage, which is excellent performance. So the consumer benefits are paramount. On the other side of the coin, the challenges in terms of consumer policy are quite interesting. Certainly, consumer privacy, consumer security comes to mind, but also consumer safety. Experts we've spoken to around the world have completely opposite pictures of consumer safety in terms of radiation. One leading scientist says, not a problem. Another says, it's like standing next to a microwave oven or worse. But people may care to look at the example from France recently, where the French government were questioning the radiation level from iPhone 15. And it progressed to where the radiation level was measured. The government saying it was 50% higher than the maximum allowed. And that relied on where it was measured, next to a person's ear or on a table. So quite a dichotomy of issues. Turning to regulatory, which is probably the silent area of the three, the 6G frame will undoubtedly contribute significantly to the development of a global standard through the International Organization of Standards. The challenge, however, is the metagrid. The IT environment of complexity, constant change, and even limited knowledge. Limited public knowledge. For example, a lot of the IP is proprietary, of course, trade secrets, patents, or developed through military channels and therefore not available for public benefit. So may I suggest, in terms of regulation, that following the introduction of a standard, and this may apply to broader areas across the IT industry, that a new form of regulation may evolve. That is proscriptive regulation rather than the prescriptive form of standards. Proscriptive is also referred to as outcomes focused, or in some cases, soft regulation. Some governments prefer the proscriptive to the prescriptive. But what will come of that is that if you think back to one of the earliest models of this mixed mode approach, the harmless lawnmower, when it was introduced, there were heavy prescriptive regulations about the parts that could be used in a lawnmower. That then progressed with thinking to a complete switch. So industry now works to proscriptive rules. lawnmowers cannot exceed a certain level of decibels. In ARPI, we are looking at proscriptive regulation at the moment in conjunction with partners in two other major industries in the world. One is the enhancement of the resilience of critical infrastructure across transport, communications, medicine, bushfires, floods, and more. So proscriptive regulation does seem to fit the complex environment of the IT world. More to come on that. But to summarise the two policy principles, context of 6G in the IT environment is everything. And secondly, implementation analysis during the development of 6G and the rollout is critical. Implementation analysis, because in our opinion, the absence of implementation analysis is one of the greatest public policy challenges in the world today. If you think across countries at policies introduced, how many have turned out with unexpected consequences and require change or fixing or remain as problems? So these areas are important to avoid unintended consequences and to enjoy the benefits of what 6G can produce. So thank you for listening, and back to you, Ryan, to progress to the frame itself and the panel discussion.
Thank you, Tony. Great speech and good coverage of many different aspects of the policy and risk challenges as we move ahead to 6G. I'll now like to hand over the time to Dr. Priyanka Singh to take over the panel session. Priyanka, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So before proceeding, first of all, I would like to invite Professor V. Sridhar from IIIT Bangalore to give some insights on the project findings.
Thank you, Priyanka. So hope you can hear me.
Yes, you are.
I'll just share my slides. Is it visible?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Priyanka, Ryan, Tony, Ujjwal, for inviting me to this particular session on 6G technology standards and regulation. So in fact, Tony has given a very good overview of the key findings of this project, and he has made my work easier. However, I would like to present some of the key findings. And in this context, Priyanka, I am aware of the time for this particular session, but if you can signal me about 5 minutes before, then I'll be able to sort of wrap it up.
Yeah, sure, sure.
So let me just go to the full mode. Okay. So as Ryan has correctly pointed out, we have taken a multidisciplinary approach to understand the technology standards and regulation that are present in are going to be present in 6G. To introduce myself, I am Sridhar. I'm a faculty in the Center for IT and Public Policy at IIIT Bangalore, the International Institute of Information Technology, Bangalore. So Ryan has already given you a brief overview of the partners of this particular project. So we have ARPI, IIIT Bangalore, and CUTS International, bringing in various expertise to this particular project funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and the Australia government. So this particular project has these 4 research components. The first one is to understand the 6G technology and analyze the security risks and vulnerabilities, as Tony has pointed out. The component 2 discusses the strategic opportunities for developing the 6G ecosystem between India and Australia. Fortunately, India and Australia are in the same region, at least with respect to the International Telecommunications Union and Region 3. And hence, we have an opportunity here to provide some strategic guidelines for the evolution of 6G. The research component 3 looks at the standards development process in 6G, and the research component 4 looks at critical elements of the regulatory and ethical framework as discussed briefly by Tony. What I will do is that I will look at the component 1, which is the technology behind 6G and the security aspects of 6G, and also look at RC 3 and RC 4 briefly, but most of the key findings have already been given by Tony earlier. Now, I just want to give you an overview of the methodology that we have adopted for this particular project. As you know, 6G is still in the evolution stage. It is expected that the standardization of 6G is going to happen around 2030. So we are at least about 7 to 8 years ahead of the curve. And that's a great news for all of us. But having said that, we have used mixed mode methodology in order to elicit experts' opinion. Basically, we have done exhaustive structured interviews with experts in the telecom industry, academia, government, standard setting organizations, and industry organizations, both in India as well as Australia for this particular project. We have also done a lot of launch meetings and workshops. In India, we have had workshop on last year, as well as just on the 1st of February at IIIT Bangalore. And this discussions that are going to happen in the panel later today will also provide a lot of insights to this particular project. And as Tony has pointed out, we have also used the strategic risk policy framework, which is developed by ARPI, to understand the technology vulnerabilities and exposures and the risk mitigation strategies towards 6G deployment. So let me just briefly give you an overview of 6G. Most of you will be knowing what 6G is all about. Just want to point out the significant differences between 5G and 6G. As you can see here in 6G, we are going to have a lot of new applications. For example, holographic applications, tactile internet, because of the very low latency that can be provided through 6G. We also will have a lot of applications in the biomedical space. There is a new form of communication called molecular communication, which is also being standardized in 6G, which will provide communication through chemical processes and hence will facilitate biomedical communication within the body and between the body and the associated devices. We are going to see a lot of Internet of Nano Things. We have discussed about Internet of Things in 5G, but as we progress towards 6G, we are going to have many, many nano things which are going to be present all over us. And these are going to be connected through a very high frequency communication known as terahertz communication. We are going to have a lot of applications with respect to intelligence at the edges. So we are going to see the deployment of AI, the artificial intelligence and machine learning methodologies present at the edges in order to improve performance and also provide very low latency and high bandwidth in 6G. If you look at the 6G technology outcomes at the outer layer, you can see that the peak rates are going to exceed terabits per second with mobility support greater than or equal to 1,000 kilometers per hour. So which means that inter-vehicle communication at very, very high speeds are possible in 6G. The latency is going to be in microseconds, which will allow tactile internet and also very, very advanced communication, especially in healthcare, transport, and applications such as that. The device density, because of the Internet of Nano Things, are going to be very, very high in billions. And we are going to see also that the bandwidth, which is going to be present, the density of bandwidth is going to be in terabits per second. So all these are new developments which are going to happen in 6G. And it will provide ubiquitous intelligence and very high speed, high bandwidth, low latency communication across Internet of Nano Things in the future. So having said that, let us focus on the risks which are posed by 6G. We can possibly foresee, as Tony has mentioned earlier, a lot of security related risks. We have analyzed in the report the layer-wise security attacks that can possibly happen in 6G, but we will see that there will be a lot of physical to application layer level attacks. We can also envision crypto attacks and quantum attacks, which are going to be present in 6G. Since 6G is going to deploy extensive AI and ML-based algorithms, autonomous agents in the various network devices, there are going to be a number of vulnerability points on the network, especially in the edge of the network and also in the distributed nodes of the network. We are going to probably see a lot of privacy intrusions and data protection issues, as we have discussed by Tony. We also envision that there can also be cyber warfare, which can possibly create very, very harmful effects on the critical infrastructure of the countries at large. So we need to look at all these in order to protect us against possible vulnerabilities. And hence this project takes a multidisciplinary approach to look at the technology issues behind 6G, the standardization effect, and also the regulatory and ethical aspects of 6G in order to provide some valuable points for future research and also applications. Now, if you look at the cybersecurity preparedness of Australia and India, this is a glimpse of the kind of things that are happening in both our countries. So as Ryan has pointed out earlier, University of Queensland has the Cybersecurity Center, and we also have cybersecurity policy in Australia developed in 2023. There is also the Infrastructure Act of 2018 in Australia. Much like, as Ryan pointed out, the Computer Emergency Response Team, India is a nodal agency in India for reporting security vulnerabilities. Much like Australia, we have a CERT. We also are doing a lot of changes to the laws and acts that govern regulations of information technology. For example, as we, at this point of time, there are about 3 major revisions are happening in our legal structures and regulations across various aspects of IT. So it is a great opportunity for India and Australia to co-develop cyber talent pipeline and also prepare the future skills initiative between the 2 countries. So there can be a lot of opportunities for us to work together towards preparing technology skills to combat security threats and vulnerabilities of 6G in the future. So having said that, I will just now move on to the standardization and the new opportunities for technical and standard solutions between India and Australia. So as we are here, somewhere here on the release 18 of the 3GPP standards process, and it is going to take quite some time, at least 3 revisions of the 3GPP standards for us to hit the release 21 in roughly about 2030 for the 6G standards to be matured. So as we move towards 5G advanced and 6G, there is a lot of opportunities for us to work with the International Telecommunications Union and the 3rd generation or 5th generation partnership project of the ITU in order to provide our inputs to the standard making process. So we are ahead of the game. As we have mentioned earlier, we also have developed a number of institutions within our countries in order to provide inputs to the standardization process globally. For example, India has set up a Telecom Standards Development Institute, which is a nodal standard development organization for India. We have already managed to actually include a bit of the India standards into the release 17 new radio specifications of 3GPP. The 6G standardization effects are set to start. There is a technology innovation group for 6G, which has already been developed in India. And the Telecom Standards Development Society of India has also submitted the 6G vision to the International Telecommunications Union. As we are progressing, there is research and development. The 6G technologies are happening worldwide. I mean, as we speak today, the China and the US contribute to roughly 40% and 35% of the global filings for 6G patents. And therefore, it is a very good opportunity for India and Australia to develop or include technology patents as standard essential patents to the standard setting process as well. So given the critical stage of the global telecommunications ecosystem and the pre-standard 6G trials are going to start, so it is an opportune time for us to work together to chart a unified path forward for the standard development process. So we have some existing agreements and collaborations which are going on. For example, we have built some regional standards organization, and it is indeed, it's very important for us to work across the Indo-Pacific region to leverage support from different standard setting bodies in order to include certain country or region-specific standards into the 6G development process, especially with respect to the intellectual property, the standard essential patents, and so on. So this is one of the areas in which India and Australia can definitely collaborate in the standard setting process. So I will move on to the regulatory aspect, about which Tony also mentioned briefly. So there are a lot of challenges with respect to regulation. For example, cybersecurity regulation has to be beefed up. We are basically looking at zero trust systems where the trust has to be developed as and when the entities come into the 6G network. So this is going to be a very big problem. I think Ryan and others in the cyber group at the University of Queensland will also be looking at some of these aspects of zero trust systems. We also have to look at cross-border cybersecurity because of the cyber warfare and other cross-border cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities that may be present in 6G. A host of issues around competition and antitrust, significant market power assessment has to be relooked. We have to basically relook at the net neutrality issues, which are going to open up a Pandora's box when we move towards 6G. As Tony has already mentioned, infrastructure readiness is going to be key. If we want to have an inclusive infrastructure, backhaul capacities, and the civic infrastructure in the countries and the different regions of the countries have to be beefed up quite a bit in order to leverage the full benefits of 6G. We also have to look at a universal service to attain the sustainable development goals, rural rollouts. How are we going to do rural rollouts, especially when the communication happens at high frequencies is a big question mark. So we need to address a number of things, including how to provide funding for universal service, especially in the semi-urban and rural areas of the country. As Tony has pointed out, there are a host of consumer protection issues, including quality of service, privacy protection in the era of 6G that needs to be looked at. A lot of things need to be done in spectrum management. As we know, there is a host of issues with respect to either licensing or unlicensed radio spectrum. Especially, we have not made any breakthrough in the allocation of terahertz spectrum. I'm not very sure whether Australia is looking at the terahertz spectrum as we speak. The only country that I know of that has made a little bit of progress in looking at the terahertz spectrum for 6G is the US, where 95 gigahertz to 3 terahertz has been allocated for 6G. There are also evolving technical standards. Global standardization is required for 6G. So there's a whole lot of regulatory challenges and deployments for researchers in this particular area and policymakers to look at. So that's a brief. I think I have covered within the time that is allocated to me the important aspects of 6G as we move forward. So if you have, I will hand it over to Dr. Priyanka to take it further. Over to you, Priyanka.
Yeah, thank you. It was very well within the time. So without further delay, we can start up with our panel discussion. Let me introduce the panelists first of all. So we have David Ross, who is an associate professor here at UQ and also part of UQ Cyber. His research mainly, focuses on establishing trusted connections between devices and services. So welcome, David. Second, we
Thank
have,
you.
Second, we have Professor Rajiv from who is like an adjunct professor at IIT Delhi and IIT Gandhinagar in India. He has also served as the CEO for the joint PhD program here at UQ for 23 years with IIT Delhi. And his research mainly spans like different research labs, for instance, TCS, General Motors, IBM, etc. So welcome, Rajiv, for the panel.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Salman Varis, who is the managing partner at Tech Legacy Advocates and Solicitors. He's a specialist in TMT and data privacy law firm. He has also like internationally recognized technology and lawyer. He has advised the Ministry of Communications and the Ministry of Defense to the Government of India. So welcome, Salman.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, so next we have Gillian Savage from ARPI, who is a fellow and vice president of Global ARPI. Also, she has extensive senior executive experience in government policy, programs, and transformation. So welcome, Gillian.
Thank you, and it's Gillian, Jill.
Okay, Gillian. Okay, sorry for that.
That's all right. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So next we have Alan. He's also from RPI. He's a fellow and vice president of competition and consumer policy. He has served as the deputy chairperson at the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. Currently, he is working with the NSW Department of Consumer Service to combat cyber fraud. So welcome, Alan. Okay, so here we go, and we get started with our panel discussion. So I have changed a bit in the, in the order that I'll be posing the questions. So please forgive me for that, but I've made the questions really crisp, and I'll try to, clarify them if there are some ambiguities. Okay, so my first question goes to Alan, who has been, an expert in this consumer protection. So Alan, what do you think are, the current concerns in the telecom networks? And
Sorry, go ahead.
And how do you think we can regulate them? So, yeah.
Sure. Well, there are a whole raft of them. There are issues in both consumer protection and competition. I'll start with the consumer protection side, and that here in Australia and globally, billions of dollars each year are being taken from consumers in cyber fraud and crime, and that those rates are growing, well, not exactly exponentially, but pretty close to that. Each year we see a vast increase of that. That's facilitated by the growing features of the internet system. Poor data protection and privacy measures have caused scandals again here in Australia in the last couple of years, with major corporations like Optus and healthcare organizations, through carelessness, releasing the records of millions of customers, and that there's a lot of social damage that comes from that and causes reputational damage. And so inadequate regulation has also allowed a real flood of unsafe, exploitative, false and misleading market for goods and services. And on the competition side, we've seen strong moves to monopolize markets, price gouging practices, and actually we've seen a choking off of innovation that might have brought cheaper and better services to consumers. And that includes things like market foreclosure and the use of intellectual property-based anti-competitive practices. So that's just a quick summary of those things. I think you asked what can be done about it. Well, first I just want to say that in the context of 6G, of course, it's a continuity. It's not as though 6G is just going to eliminate all those past problems, but instead it will exacerbate some of them. It just means with much greater bit rates, lower latency, and applications across a whole wider area, especially in the Internet of Things, and something I learned today, Internet of Nano Things. I hadn't anticipated that one, but
Yeah.
but that means that the field for problems has grown. But let me also say the field for growth in consumer welfare has also changed, and so the struggle is for us to find ways of harvesting all of these pro-social, pro-inclusion elements from growing 6G, but by restricting or eliminating all of the negative ones. So my simple approach to solving it, well, actually it isn't going to solve it, but it's the first step to it, is to ensure that people become alert to and aware of these changes and engage in serious conversation. I'd say to people, start by reading this report when it comes out, and let's socialize the findings of that, get debates going in civil society, in academia, among policymakers and businesses, so that we can start to engage in these things, not as we usually do when the bodies pile up in the gutters afterward, but beforehand, because we can see where these vectors of harm are going to come from, and we can see where the vectors of welfare enhancement are going to come from. So let's get in front of the game and do something about harvesting and improving those that are positive, and curtailing through regulation, culture, or practices those that are negative.
Yeah, sounds good. I think that would be a good starter, to get started with, reading the findings of this project and then getting acquainted with what are the real challenges. Okay, yeah, thanks, Ellen. Now, my next question to Gillian. So we have seen that ICT, that is information and communication technologies, are very crucial for any country, right? From the defense and the strategic point of view. So what government mechanisms do you think, can help to identify the vulnerabilities in this growing path towards 6G? And what we can do to mitigate the cyber attack risk in this direction?
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I'd like to start by making a couple of general comments. And, when we're talking about a regulatory approach or a regulatory framework, it has to be developed well, it has to be implemented, it has to be administered, and it also has to have enforcement aspects. I guess my general statement is in Australia, we're not great at that. We develop legislation that is not necessarily, I think, fit for purpose in a modern world. And the tail end of the administration, I think the enforcement fades away quite a lot, depending on what sector you're looking at. So, we've got to really be careful about regulatory approaches. The other thing I would say is that in terms of telecommunications and technology, it's no longer a service that you buy if you can afford it. It's such an integral part of how we live our lives, and it's so deeply integrated into not just living well, but also lifting communities and supporting communities as well. So essentially, it's become a public good in a way. I don't think that telecommunications organisations see that in terms of how they approach their sectors, and certainly I don't think, say, software developers would think about it in that context. But it's so endemic that it essentially is part of, and some of the speakers have already said this, it's part of how we live our lives. The challenge with all of that is that it becomes a much more collaborative approach to delivering and doing the right thing by communities. So, there's still, I think, a long way to go in the current environment for us to understand that paradigm shift. So in terms of the global landscape, it's quite diverse. There's a range of approaches that are being pursued, from voluntary approaches to standards to regulatory responses. My preference is always to start with voluntary approaches, but that depends on the sector, and some sectors are actually better at that than others. The Australian government thinking at the moment appears to be a bit more around waiting and seeing. There's a sense that the current regulatory approaches, particularly in relation to sector-specific regulation, is best placed for looking at these challenges and responding to these challenges. That's assuming if they arise. So that's kind of that wait and see and potentially quite reactive approach, and certainly not a proactive stance. So I think there's a bit of a challenge for us all in that. I do think that ethical standards that have a sector focus should be the focus, supported by global, collaborative and harmonised standards. Again, some of those sectors are better at that. Some of the professional sectors are better at that. I think this is a very different space for telecommunications and technology developers. There are some examples worldwide of some of this collaboration, and an example is in October 2023, the UK, Australia, Canada, Japan and US governments established a global coalition on telecommunications with the intent to coordinate multilateral initiatives, including for development of 6G and future telecommunications. But drawing on Alan's points, the challenge for the current is that we don't have policy coherence and regulatory clarity around telecommunications and technology. And I think the first order priority needs to be to ease some of that tension and to, highlight that paradigm shift that's needed, that this is no longer a service that people choose to buy, this is part of the way we live our lives. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you to hear that. So Professor Rajiv, can I please invite you, and can you please, shed some light based on your experience from the perspective of India? Like, would you feel that India can take steps towards this, overcoming the challenges mentioned by Alan and Gillian, like from the maybe networking and policy point of view?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dr. Priyanka, and really appreciate. Thanks for the invitation. I think it's a very timely panel discussion on a very important topic. Thanks to Tony Charge and my good friend, Professor V. Sridhar. I think they really laid the foundations, and of course, my eminent colleagues here spoke earlier before me. I think, this is so as I was talking to a lot of colleagues in the government of India, the last few weeks have been busy, and I think Ujjwal knows that we've been running helter-skelter, trying to do many things with the government, and not just the government, but even the private sector. I think it's a great time to, as we all know, let me start very quickly by sharing that 5G standards are done, right? It's kind of over. Deployments are going on globally, but the standards are done. So therefore, this is a golden opportunity for us to figure out what are the right strategies in 6G in terms of, as Sridhar mentioned, the plethora of technologies. The entire automation is a big, one of the key plus points of 6G is that, end-to-end automation, the openness, the full openness feature of 6G, I think is going to be very interesting for us to see, us as in India and Australia. I think the whole AI enablement, and I see AI as an overlay over the current networks, is going to be quite a game changer. So the technology space is very, very diverse, right? And I don't think we'll be able to look at all, because it spans from IoT on the one hand all the way to edge and cloud. I think two key things. One is standardization. Great time for India and Australia to collaborate and further enhance the standardization. Two, I think cybersecurity. That is one area that we need to start thinking as soon as possible, immediately. Because what we've seen earlier is that cybersecurity is always an overlay. It's an afterthought, right? I was giving a talk yesterday in IIITB, global talk, and this was on edge security. And one of my points I mentioned was that a lot of attack vectors happen because you think of security as an afterthought. It's never planned ab initio. Therefore, there are vulnerabilities in protocols, there are vulnerabilities in code, in implementation. I think this is a great challenge for us to fill those gaps right away at t is equal to 0, because we're just beginning to take off the 6G, we're just beginning to take off there. So if we can look at, my 2 cents are that the new attack surfaces and the new attack vectors stemming from the fact that there are a plethora of technologies and services sitting on 6G would be very, very critical. And that, of course, as Gillian pointed out, the whole policy issues, right? It's all weaved around the right policies. Privacy, for example, is going to be critical. India now has a very, very stringent privacy law. We are kind of making good, marching very strongly in that front. Australia has, extremely important laws around that too. So I think weave in privacy, weave in standards. This is a great time for both of us, Australia and India, to take a lead in identifying these attack surfaces, as I call them, and then going deeper attack vectors in each of the technologies that Sridhar pointed out. Now, we may not have answers to all, but we will certainly have answers to the critical ones. For example, edge computing. I have no doubt whatsoever that edge is and it will continue to play an extremely important role to all the organizations in IT and academic institutions working in technology for reasons that are well known. I mean, edge is closer to the last mile. It's the last mile closer to IoT devices. For all the real-time and the semi-real-time applications, edge will play a critical role. And so if we can even start with edge and identify, the entire ecosystem of attacks, including privacy, I think we'll be in a very good shape. So great time to have these brainstorming sessions.
Okay, great. Yeah, great. That's a good, emphasis on the edge computing security. So David, can you please shed some light on your aspects like the standardization regarding the integration of IoT, cloud, and quantum computing towards, a secure 6G ecosystem?
Can't shed much light on the standardization because, of course, that all is yet to happen. Certainly, my main connection with the IoT stuff has been recently working on that standard on secure connections between clients and server devices in the IoT space. I'm yet to see how 6G is going to actually get down to that level because, of course, most IoT sensors just don't have compute power. And that's one of the big problems we have with those is authenticating them and creating those secure connections. Certainly, you can have servers using certificates and things like that, but an IoT device just simply doesn't have the processing power to authenticate in that manner. And that's where the AI background of 6G may indeed help, especially where you've got sensors, even if they're not directly talking 6G, if they're talking to their edge devices and the edge devices are then using 6G, they can use that as one of the new ways to do authentication. They don't have to rely purely on the device. They'll be able to use other methods and have some smarts about the authentication of those devices, the sensor devices that are out there on the networks. My main interest, the most thing I've been doing in the last few years has been autonomous vehicles. So in that manner, sort of like in current standards, autonomous vehicles use DSRC to talk to each other, but they use 5G to do bulk downloads. So they'll use 5G to talk to roadside devices, and they use DSRC to talk to each other. So they use very fast protocols to talk to each other. And when there's some heavy lifting involved, then they'll switch to 5G to download maps and things like that for the area. And that's where 6G certainly will be able to not only get to roadside devices, but to individual devices like currently in autonomous vehicles, we can only know where things like cyclists are if they have a mobile phone with them that's also participating in the same communication process. So that's one of the things where 6G is going to play a major advantage as we get further automation in the vehicles and things like that. But yes, happy for any questions on anything related to that. But really, when it comes to IoT, that's a tiny little device with no processing power. That's a long way down the field.
Yeah, totally agree on that. Yeah, thank you, David. Okay, talking of that, like Salman, can you shed some light onto like what research gaps do you really identify, like seeing the cybersecurity framework in India, as well as like you're familiar with other international, you have worked with different frameworks. So can you just shed some light on the gaps that you see in this perspective of cyberspace and moving towards the 6G?
Surely. Thank you so much, Priyanka, and thanks for having me here once again. I think this has been really a very interesting discussion, and I believe Tony had set the context very appropriately. From the gaps perspective, of course, I would borrow from Rajiv and what, of course, Sridhar earlier pointed out as well, and so did Gillian. We have had a reactive approach to things. And what's more important is to provide for, and this is where the opportunity lies for both Australia and India to collaborate, is provide for in advance. And that's where 6G, gives that opportunity to us. Unfortunately, in India, we have had this, and I think it's grained in our culture, that we kind of, have knee-jerk reaction to a lot of things, and especially as far as regulation is concerned, and more importantly, the laws. So whether it's the IT law, which was first enacted in 2000, it was a knee-jerk reaction to the pressures from the US and the European governments as part of the call center industry. There had been major scandals around that time. So major data breach cases. And so is the current, the data protection, the digital data protection law, which has been just passed in the parliament.
it's been more of a knee-jerk reaction for the clamoring that had been happening for almost last 2 decades, and we kind of really stumbled through it. And even now, after having the legislation itself in place, we are still awaiting the rules, which are virtually the implementing rules. And when Rajiv had done the regulatory slide, I was kind of smiling to myself, because I think of all the aspects that he highlighted on that slide, I think, oh, sorry, this was Sridhar when he had put that slide on. It was only the data protection regulation that was in place. The rest of them, all those aspects and various points that he highlighted, we are nowhere. So it's again, we are waiting for something to happen before we kind of move. And same is the case with cybersecurity, whether it's in India or in Australia. We have had major scandals, and the major data breaches that happened recently in India, whether it was the CoWIN data breach or the Aadhaar data breach, which happened earlier. And more recently, of course, in Australia as well, the Optus data breach, and then other cybersecurity instances that have happened. I think we have to ensure that when we move forward in terms of regulating and standard setting in 6G, and I think Gillian pointed this out as well, and so did Alan, that we have to ensure that we take on this challenge and ensure that what we provide in advance, and we learn from the mistakes of the past. And that's where the opportunity of collaboration lies for India and Australia. We're already part of the Quad, and I think it was mentioned, earlier by Alan that the global coalition. Gullian mentioned it. That US, Japan, Australia, and then Canada were part of the global coalition that was formed in 2023 for telecommunications. Unfortunately, in spite of the fact that India is part of the Quad, we missed that opportunity. So I think even as a country, we need to probably step in, take up the opportunity, and move ahead in collaboration with the regional partners to ensure that we have a proper regulatory regime in place before we even start looking at spectrum allocation or start looking at 6G as a technology. And I think that's where we kind of lag behind. I always say this, at the end of I will not take more time, is that most importantly, in spite of having the regulation and the laws in place, the most important aspect is the sensitization of all the stakeholders as far as the law itself is concerned, because you could have the best laws in place, but if people are not aware of them, not sensitized, whether it's the law enforcement agencies, the public, or the private sector, I think it would be very difficult to sort of actually implement the law. So it's all about building a culture in the society, and I think it's high time, as far as 6G is concerned, if we can take those initiatives, sensitize people, initiate the relevant regulatory mechanisms and policies in collaboration with regional and international partners. And 6G is going to be a technology, as we are hearing it today, it would involve all, it will make it more necessary for all governments to collaborate. So it's important that we move ahead. We can't move in silos. We have to move in collaboration with the regional and international partners as far as regulating is concerned, because those are some of those challenges that we are still facing with the, as I think Tony pointed out, with metagrid, and when we're working in the metagrid, I think we need to have a global approach or regional approach to things than just being, a territorial or a country-based approach. So those are my 2 cents. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Salman. Yeah. So talking about, the regulatory framework, so I'll come back again to Alan. How can we ensure that, like, from the perspective of consumer protection, if you're talking about how to, put that in place about the regulatory framework, and given the AI interfaces, the feasibility of deep fakes and things like that Tony also pointed out in the beginning, giving some examples. So Ellen, can you please shed some light on this aspect, like how to ensure a robust regulatory framework for the consumer protection?
In part, as Gillian said, there is currently in most governments an incoherent approach. That's because for most countries, and India and Australia certainly, there is a sort of somewhat siloed policy making and regulation. And so if you consider even the distinction between aspects of competition policy and consumer policy or intellectual property policy, those tend to be owned by different officials in government, and hence different political and social constituencies, and that they often have, of course, their own goals and aren't overly concerned about sharing or compromising on things. And that's why over decades, countries like Australia and India, from my experience, end up having a lack of coverage on those things. So that's not to say how it's going to be fixed. That's just to describe where it's broken. And I say, just as it is with any major problem, you don't get to an answer without actually recognizing the problem and where it's come from. The reason that this is both an opportunity and a threat is that, well, the opportunity because we do have a couple of years as standards are set and people can think it through, use cases are developed and things like that. The threat, though, is again, as Gillian mentioned, because governments have persuaded themselves that they have to watch and see what happens before they act. And there's sort of some logic behind that. And if I think of India, it took more or less 30 years or so in Indian policy for governments to remove themselves from being closely involved in pretty well everything that happened. But then it's an error to do that too much, to then let things run and then only try and intervene afterward. So acting now is the most important thing to determine what the critical policies should be. And that I think we have a great benefit in that pretty well all the countries of the world in recent years have endorsed the UN Millennium Goals for Development. And that sets out a really great set of policy goals for society, for inclusion, closing the digital gap, for looking at costs, availability, and all of those things, and that they can be the things that guide some policy aspiration. And that's where you start, the policy aspiration, look at where we are, where we want to get to, and what steps are necessary to make that happen. In my view, we've been a bit reluctant to use the regulatory tools of government that include sanctions and enforcement, and that's got to change as well. If that's left only to persuasion, codes of practice, or industry best practice, then I think we'll constantly see consumer welfare being shaved. We'll see anti-competitive practices abound, and worse still, we'll see many of the huge potential welfare benefits to consumers and businesses frittered away. So it's about urgency, it's about identification, and it's about action. Here's a really good case study. India has been, I think, really engaged for a year or so now, and I've made several visits there over the last year, in the dilemma of whether to have regulation that acts in advance or regulation that acts after the event. And that if you look at the debate, the strongest argument against regulation to cover future events there is the fear that it might block innovation, stifle innovation. But my response is to say that in many of these cases, a failure to act on market power, collusion, and things like that leads to much greater negative outcomes in blocking innovation and new goods and services coming to market. And so that's not a good argument for not having legislation that tries to set industry structures to some extent and to try and prohibit practices that are unwanted. So again, then, it's a matter of looking at modern types of legislation and regulation and not relying on the old toolbox from past years where we tend to leave the problems get to too serious a level before there's effective intervention.
Definitely, yeah. That lag should be, that's something that India has to take on. I mean, it can't keep on waiting for things to get pretty serious and then act on that. Now, talking about that, like I have a next question to Gillian. Gillian, do you think that 6G can basically overcome these network barriers that, just mentioned by Alan here? How optimistic are you? Like this research will fill in the gaps that are just pointed out?
Look, I think, there's lots of opportunity and lots of benefit. And we have to be careful that, when Tony was talking, he was talking about the 80-20. Most of what will be achieved will be very good. But we just need to be alert to the other spectrum or the other end of that. And, as Alan was saying, we are very reactive, particularly Australia as a nation. And, we do tend to wheel out legislation when something's gone wrong. And that tends to be really, I guess, jarring. I'll say it's jarring, which means it impacts unnecessarily and perhaps inadvertently on a whole range of other things. So, the extent to which I suppose the case of Optus was raised earlier, the fundamental problem still is in relation to data. Organisations believe that they own the data when in fact they are keeping it safe. They are a custodian of other people's data. And I think, some of this stuff doesn't require legislative intervention. It requires consumers, it requires communities to place different expectations on the organisations, on the companies in particular, who are engaging with the technology and who are, I guess, making assumptions about what community and consumers want, what they expect, and how to go about that. So, that's the paradigm shift I was talking about. And the public good aspect of this, I think, really needs to be highlighted and heightened much more than what it is at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. Talking about that, like Rajiv, I want, can you please, think of, you did emphasize about the edge computing thing that's really, really very, promising. What other security challenges do you see here? Like when we transition from, let's say, 5G to 6G in place, one thing is that the regulatory framework. What about the other aspects if we think about the cyberspace?
Yeah, good question, Dr. Priyanka. So I think, keep in mind that 6G defines several additional technologies, as we heard from even Professor Sridhar, right? So just to quickly recap, there is terahertz communication. Now, 5G is all about millimeter wave, right? Not all about, but a lot of 5G is millimeter wave, and that's really 30 to 300 gigahertz. And that's a typical range. It's not exactly that, but a typical range. But if you go to terahertz communications, number one, if you're going to reconfigurable intelligent surfaces, right, RIS, which is another very important technology in 6G, you go to distributed ledger. So you're really also going to have, you want to ensure, so as we all know, blockchain or distributed ledger ensures tamper resistance, not security, but tamper resistance. And then, visible light communications, and all these have been pointed out very nicely by my colleagues before me. I think they will spawn additional attack vectors, right? Let's take an example. Terahertz. Now, if you have terahertz or close to terahertz, you are talking about extremely high frequency. Therefore, the range is much smaller. Therefore, the cell size is much smaller. Therefore, the number of cells are the numbers are huge, right? And in that context, if the numbers are huge, now you are talking about challenges in handover, challenges when there is mobility. So I think it's clear that there will be a large number of additional attack vectors and services, right? Number one. Number two, if we're going to a fully open, footprint, let's say full openness, which is the future of 6G, right? Open RAN, for example, as many of you spoke earlier, right? Then that itself will bring some vulnerabilities because open source has its own challenges, right? And I think finally 6G is also, one of the things they are grappling with, not only in academia, but also with industries. What are the killer apps? What are the relevant use cases for 6G? And some of the examples that come to my mind is Industry 5.0. Right. So Industry 4.0 is there. I mean, we already been working on, many of us have been working on it for a long, long time now. But now comes Industry 5.0, the human-computer interaction, the workers as well as the automation. Smart Grid 2.0, autonomous vehicles, as pointed out by, I think Alan or David pointed this out. I think autonomous vehicles has so much of technical challenges, CV2X, cybersecurity therein. Digital twins. I mean, now digital twins have become extremely important to industry. I've been talking to one of the top industries in this country, and you probably don't have to name it, and they are gung-ho about digital twins. They're saying, look, we can't do without it because we just can't afford to experiment without first having digital twins. That itself will get vulnerabilities, right? And finally, I think if we're looking at a network, not just terrestrial, but terrestrial, satellite, and the network, including the UAVs and drones, it's going to be quite a challenge because the drones will open up a whole new Pandora's box of cyber attacks, which if we are not well equipped, will be a big challenge. But I'm very optimistic. I'm inherently very optimistic. I think the fact that we started early in the 6G journey, and the fact that the two countries are really enhancing collaboration in every sense, not just in technology, but even in governance, in policies, of course, in research and technology, I think we'll be able to address many of these issues, if not all these issues, in course of time. So,
definitely, yeah. So, David, do you want to add something from the perspective of Internet of Vehicles? Because that's what the recent research you have been working on. What challenges?
As I was saying, the recent research I've been doing is totally unrelated to that, and it was the recent standards that I was actually editing was for that. So I was actually taking the words of the experts and turning it into an ISO IEC standard. It wasn't my research on those ones, but yeah. Exactly as Rajiv was saying, we've yet to see what's going to come out of all this, and we're starting in the right place by actually planning everything first before we actually try and standardize something in the usual way of designing something first and then standardizing it after everyone's implemented. It would be good to actually get some standards in place in time to actually control how this is going to happen. But yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah, that's a good add-on and a good aspect. Yeah. So, Ujjwal, do you want to, you have been like the main person that has been involved in this research, right? Do you want to add something to some aspect that we missed on discussing here?
Thank you, Priyanka. I've been Hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you're audible.
I've been working, basically to set the framework for the research. Sridhar and other researchers have deep dive. But I think from the technology point of view, one thing that we are hearing about quantum cryptography as a safety measure. We would like to hear from the technologists, Rajiv and David, if they can chip in. And in the regulatory framework, we have touched upon a few things, maybe what we can do for more inclusive technology, and how this can reduce digital divide. How is there a gender aspect as well to the technology? Maybe Gillian can come in, how to improve that gender aspect as far as inclusivity is concerned. So I think some time on these two issues from technology point of view, quantum cryptography, and in regulatory inclusiveness, particularly from gender perspective. I think some debate is there.
Okay, yeah. So there are two aspects, like if we want to discuss more on that. So mostly talking about, post-quantum cryptography challenges from the perspective of IoT and IOV. They're huge, like the ciphers or the encryption schemes that we're using today. We don't know what will happen once the post-quantum cryptography, becomes realistic. So maybe David, you can again, you can add on, and then Gillian can also add up your perspective of like these
All
two
I
things.
know is NIST currently running its competitions to come up with post-quantum encryption algorithms that are going to survive slightly longer than our current algorithms once we actually get enough qubits actually coming into the computers now. Certainly at this stage, the standard algorithms are surviving. We're getting in the many tens to subparts of 100 qubits, but we're really going to have to get into the multiples of thousands of qubits before we start putting current cryptography at risk. However, at the rate it's changing, who knows how long that could be. But certainly NIST has started competitions for post-quantum algorithms and seeing what's going to happen there. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks. Gillian, do you want to put some emphasis on the gender aspect pointed by Ujjwal?
Yeah, I think I don't think it's just about gender. I think it's about inclusion and diversity in the broad. And I think one of the key things is the way in which we have approached development of technology, standards, legislation, collaborative frameworks, whatever, it's been essentially top down. It's been by experts. It hasn't necessarily drawn in users. And once you draw in users, that's when you start to get those voices around the diverse perspectives. Again, I'll go back to data and telecommunications companies. They're the custodians of someone else's valued possession. And I think, shifting that is important, but getting those sorts of voices in the room and really understanding. I think essentially it's about connecting the top down with the bottom up. Normally we do these things normally we do these things top down, but in a modern world, in an interconnected world, in a world that's so dependent on technology and telecommunications, we really do need to take a much more inclusive approach and develop things and hear different voices and be willing to change what we do in response to those voices. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So Salman, do you want to, add something, as you are a privacy lawyer and you might have seen this, like the challenges from the privacy, perspective. We have different, policies across different nations. for instance, GDPR we talk about, and then a similar Australian Privacy Act here, right? 1988 and things like that. So do you want to put some, emphasis, like what do you see as a challenge that will come into if you talk about the data and, related things? So what challenge do you perceive from the perspective of privacy?
Thank you once again. From a privacy perspective, I think one of the most important aspects which I observe while comparing Indian and most importantly, of course, Australian and other regimes is Australia has adopted a very sectoral approach to things, and I think that's a very big paradigm shift, as Gillian had pointed out, and at this stage, India is at the juncture where we are going through a paradigm shift in our telecommunications laws. Recently, we have amended the Telecom Act, and a little earlier last year, we had introduced this Data Protection Act. So both these, legislations have a huge, long-term impact on, and when you relate that to 6G technology, where data and traditional telecom voice converge, and of course you're using next generation technological resources. I think it's a big opportunity for both India and the regional players to sort of get their act right, and India can learn in this regard a lot from Australia because of the approaches that have been adopted in Australia. From a purely data perspective, I think what's more important is that the regulation that we already have in place, the data privacy legislation, we implement that in a more comprehensive way. Because as of now, I mean, it's halfway through. We have taken one step forward, but we have not really reached the goal. The implementing rules are not in place, and with the current elections looming, what we are hearing from the government is that they might get delayed for till the new government is formed. So that's something that's keeping the industry on the edge. And as it is, the legislation itself was quite delayed. So yes, we need a more sectoral approach, because traditionally different arms of the government have been working in a different manner, and they at times have been contravening each other, whether it's certain or whether it's requirements under the DPDP Act or the RBI regulations with regard to data localization. I think that there are times, contradictions between those regulations as well. So I think this is something that probably could be better done in the way forward, and especially with regard to 6G technology. That's my observation. Thank you.
Yeah. Great chip in. And of course, whatever we do, it's mostly, the awareness from the people's perspective. That's like one aspect that Tony also pointed out, that we talk about the social engineering aspect, and people just, sharing the data without any, it's, if you talk about the population rate, the amount of population that's really, concerned about privacy. If you talk in Indian perspective, it's like really less compared to the other countries. So maybe we need more, awareness from the people in that perspective.
I agree with that. In fact, that's why I thought I suggested that developing a culture rather than just having the legislations. Another aspect which I think which we could learn from Australia is a holistic approach, where Australia has adopted, programs where the state government, the federal government, and the private industry have come together to collaborate, whether it's from a regulatory perspective or from a technology perspective. Unfortunately, we've not had a lot of similar success cases in India, especially in cyber. So probably there could be a approach from a federal government where they involve relevant state governments as well, and also the private and industry, which this could be a big, if it's implemented properly, it could be a big success in both developing innovation for the next generation, and also especially in developing new technologies and regulatory frameworks for the 6G networks.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, do we have any questions from the audience also? Sorry, I forgot to ping and remind before. Kana, do you see any questions from our audience?
Not any so far, but feel free to type in the chat box, or if you'd rather speak, I can also allow people to talk. I can change the function as well, so just let me know.
We can close if you like.
Yeah, I don't see any questions coming up. So Ujjwal, please, I would invite you to, yeah.
Maybe 1 minute each to the panelists to wind up what they have to say.
Yeah, any, any closing thoughts that, or any, takeaway messages from this web seminar that we can, maybe work on as a future. Yeah, Alan.
Well, I think the project as a whole has covered a huge amount of territory, and anybody who's seen the draft report will see that. And I think that in handing it over to the Department of Foreign Affairs, that's sort of a bit like an anticlimax. And I think there's a risk, and I've seen it throughout my working life so often, that there are these vast warehouses, these dusty bookshelves where reports of all sort go to die, and that given the amount of energy and good ideas that have gone into it, I'd be just encouraging everybody involved not to breathe a sigh of relief when it's finished and go on to the next thing, but to see the production of the work as just the first part of a new conversation that itself will run for some time, and that we should be reaching out. For example, the efforts that we've gone to here in Australia to engage with regulators, with businesses, even to civil society organisations, have been terribly disappointing. They've either been too busy, or in the case of businesses, they've been a bit concerned about exposing any of their own intellectual property or business strategies or something, and have tended to stand back. Well, all of that is a formula for failure, a formula for disappointment. And so I hope that when we get to the stage of handing it over, that we'll do that with a very activist approach to popularizing, socializing the content, and trying to hold policymakers and others responsible for doing something about it, so that we don't, when we get around to 7G, say, well, just like 4, 5, and 6G, we left the interventions too late. We lost a lot of the potential welfare gains, and we gained a lot of grief and loss of welfare for consumers.
Yeah, definitely. It's like better to work on the findings rather than putting them into dust, right? That's a really good, very good point. Yeah.
Thank you. You've got a number of questions in the question and answer section.
Yeah, let's see them. Yeah, so the first question is like, how do we become 6G ready? What infrastructure challenges are there to, make India 6G ready? Rajiv, do you want to take this question?
Sure. Yeah, I'll be happy to. Thank you. I think we are making rapid progress in 5G, as you are all aware. And the deployment is going on very aggressively. So as I talk to you, all the big cities in all over the globe, Australia, India, are rolling out 5G. I'm not saying they have it, but they're rolling out 5G. And it's going to soon come to tier 2, tier 3s. As we do that, I think the time has come to start prototyping 6G. I think there's a great discussion going on between the governments, within the governments, across the governments, research. But I think it's time to start very quickly and aggressively, looking at proof of concepts, prototypes. So, for example, just the other day, I was talking to a colleague in the US, and we said, look, this may be a great time to just have a test bed on edge computing. Just figure out, bring it up from scratch. We don't need to, it's not an industry, it's a R&D environment to begin with. So it's a beta version, but let's look at the various attacks, look at the, the various other limitations and merits. Let's build quickly now. And that experience, and this is only one example, edge is only one example, but there are many other technologies. So I think we have to now run with the 6G technologies over the 5G. Yes, of course, you can't do away with 5G. So you're building on top of that with more intelligence and more cognition and more automation. But just to summarize, the time has now come to start seeing concrete projects, not only within India, but with Australia, where we see something tangible coming out each quarter. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it shouldn't be a project on paper and the report is, put to dust. It should be, something that's really, working and it's being applied in real time. That's what's something. Now, talking about that, let's take this next question. So we have Professor Mark Utting here. So he has posed a very good question. I suppose, like, what's the back compatibility issues with 5G and 6G, and if we walk like backwards about 4G? So how are we, working on that? Like, what will be the protocol redesigns that basically we have to work on for filling in the security holes?
Maybe David can.
Or yeah, David or Professor Sridhar, you have worked on this. I think that's your area. Maybe you can fill in
Thanks,
the
Priyanka.
like the back compatibility issues that we often have, and like what are the challenges from the protocol redesign perspective.
Thank you, Priyanka. So I can answer a part of that. So in fact, if you look at 5G, we have 2 methods of deploying 5G. So 5G can be deployed in the standalone mode, which means that it is just 5G specific, and therefore only 5G handsets and other devices which are 5G compatible will be able to work on that network. But we also have, for example, 3GPP has given the specifications for a mixed mode in which it is backward compatible. So which means that if 5G is not available, then it will fall back to 4G, 3G, and so on, and therefore it can widely be deployed. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to having this method going forward in 6G as well. For example, if you are working on the standalone mode, the efficiency and the gains with respect to the new technology will be much, much higher compared to having a mixed mode of working. But mixed mode provides a lot of inclusivity, and therefore those who do not have, for example, 6G handsets will be still able to work partially on these networks. So this I am, we are saying that even going forward in 6G, these methods of backward compatibility will be present in the standards. So we don't have to really worry too much about that. Now, the second question is, how do we plug in vulnerabilities in the protocols? So, as we move towards 6G, there are new forms of attacks which are happening because the whole protocol, right from the physical layer level onwards, is going to change. For example, the terahertz communication or molecular communication, we have not had it before, and therefore there are going to be a lot of new security holes which will develop in 6G. And therefore, Again, we have to sort of have methods and procedures by which these vulnerabilities can be plugged as these standards evolve. And that is my short answer to the big question of backward compatibility.
Yes, yes, definitely. Because, now once a technology comes in, the vulnerabilities get exposed from time to time. We can't say that, okay, we are well aware of all the attacks that happen. So I think, more research has to be happen like in the attack perspective at the different layers. And what you have pointed out as the mix model, and another new term that I, got to know is like that nano thing that you pointed out in the beginning. So yeah, definitely that's one possible direction that one has to work on. Any other questions if you have from the audience?
There are no questions.
Okay, yeah. So Ujjwal, I would invite you to, please thanks all our panelists. It was a great discussion, and also, give few pointers as to what direction, we can collaborate on strengthening up the 6G and also different, aspects of cybersecurity.
Thank you, Priyanka.
Yes.
When we began this project, there were a couple of news items in India about 6G, the formation of a technology innovation group by the government, and there was no buzz. But when we started to write and started to conduct meetings on 6G topic, the buzz has started in India. So there are now the word 6G is quite visible. Every now and then ministers talk about it, and we have a institutionalized the whole 6G vision in the sense of a dedicated task force to this, with all the standards, looking at the standards, looking at the technology development and things like that, having developed test beds in some of the IITs, and also creating a 6G alliance of industry and academics in India. So, and this institutionalization of 6G is what missing in Australia. So this Australia can take from India, but there are lessons from Australia for India to take, and particularly when it comes to some of the technologies like quantum technologies development that Australia is eyeing, and they are probably the world leaders at this moment of time, and also the quickness in norm setting. At this, there was the same time frame when the cyber attack on AIMS in India, a big medical institution happened, and the media bank and the Optus breach in Australia. While we see those two incidences leading to overhauling the whole cyber security regime in that sense, and how to leak, and the profile of cyber security certainly increasing, ministers coming and deposing themselves to the public that we are doing this, we are doing that. The same thing didn't happen. So there is there are things for cooperation between the two countries on technology front, on the norm setting fronts, and there are also collaboration that can happen intra country. Initially, the technologists did not venture into the regulatory aspects or what are the key problems that can happen with respect to a technology. But now there is an integrated approach, or there is a requirement for an integrated approach within a country or within an institution of a country. So both intra-country and inter-country collaborations are need of the hour. And from this webinar, there were some very good points coming out, particularly what we do after coming out with a norm that we need to sensitize all the stakeholders so that we are able to successfully implement those regulations. And we also see some of the points coming out like some of the countries, leading countries like US, Canada, New Zealand, India, New Zealand, Australia, and all, have the global coordination of telecom. How can India be part of that, and how can India learn from that? David Ross very rightfully raised the point of authentication. Authentication, I mean, this is authentication of the equipment for the secured network. There is a miles to go on that front as well. I mean, we have to trusted sources, how to design those trusted sources, whether there be a trust from Indian equipments in Australia or not, are the questions for future that can happen. So the list is long. So let me thank all the panelists. Let me thank Jillian, Professor Sridhar, Tony Charge, David Ross, Rajiv Sore, Alan Nasser, and also a very big clap to the UQ team, UQ Cyber team, Kana and Priyanka, to you from our side. And so thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. We also appreciate, the opportunity that we got to know so many people, and we are not from this area, but it's quite related to cybersecurity. So it's a good exposure to us as well. Okay, and my last question is like, as Alan pointed out, like it's better to get that report published somewhere so that we can get aware of the findings of the project before it goes to just a file and turning to dust. So that's something I think we'll be looking forward to. Ujjwal, you can keep us posted where we can have the access to that.
Sure. We have created a network of people by this project, and I think we should be keeping updated all the people, so that there is a cross fertilization of the technologies know about the regulation, the standard setting, and vice versa.
Okay, May I add a quick point, Priyanka and Ujjwal?
Yeah,
please.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. So I think thanks again. Wanted to express my deep gratitude all, but I just have a very important point that I shared, I think, with Ujjwal yesterday. The Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, the cybersecurity is now headed by Ms. Tulika Pandey, who needs no introduction. She's one of the leading ladies in the country now, reporting to the Secretary. She's very impressed with the work of CUTS. I spoke to her yesterday, Sridhar. May I invite all of you, whenever you're in New Delhi, of course, along with, Ujjwal can coordinate that, to visit the ministry, because I think this could spawn a lot more collaboration if it's supported to a large extent by the Ministry of Electronics and IT. I'll be happy to help, but I think things are moving just in the right direction. And whenever you happen to be in New Delhi, let us visit the ministry and further consolidate, because I see tremendous energy coming from the ministry and appreciation coming from them. So just thought I'll echo this before we wind up.
Thank you. And for the Australian audience, METI is our Ministry of Electronics and IT. And the cyber security is their domain, while there is another Department of Telecom or ministry where, so we are seeing more collaborations within these two ministries for the 6G. So the buzz is working. Yes, Rajiv, we will surely do a meeting with METI. We would love to.
Tony wants to add something. Yeah, Tony, please.
Just a comment, Priyanka, that agreeing with our colleagues that today's webinar is a unique network. And I think there is considerable value in continuing collaboration and discussions like this, because one of our principles is that in today's world, information resides in networks. So I think the diversity of opinions and views in relation to cybersecurity is very important, and is something which individual organisations do not have access to. So if we can continue something like this, I think it's very important.
Yeah, definitely. Very good point. That's what we call in cybersecurity as, cyber threat intelligence sharing. And that's what like something is really needs to be worked upon, where, different organizations come together and then they, build trust, like as pointed out by David, like authorization and verifiability and how we can, build more cyber resilience for like at the world level. So definitely, that's the network that we have to keep up, even though the seminar is ending today. And yeah, we'll be hopeful for, more opportunities where all of the organization can collaborate together on different aspects of cybersecurity.
So this is
Thank you,
this is the
everyone.
beginning. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone
you.
for chipping
Thank you
in
very much.
and a great
And
webinar.
thank you participants
Thank
also.
you, Priyanka, for your moderation.
Yeah.
Thank you,
everyone.
Priyanka.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Priyanka.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.